looks like everybody's here. Just double check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah. Okay. All right. So if everybody's ready, we'll get started. It's the advisory board meeting for October 13th. And we are holding this meeting via Zoom in accordance with Massachusetts state law due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It is being recorded and it will also be published on YouTube. So real quick, before we do the warrant articles for CPC, Kristen would like to go ahead and approve the minutes for last week. So in case she has to jump off the call early. So if we could go ahead and do that.
They're actually not for last week. They're for the 29th. We're still behind by 1 week just because our meetings have been so long. Erica's taking due time and appropriate time to get those right. So I did drop off the minutes from September 9th this week at Town Hall. So I have reviewed the minutes from September 29th, and I would like to motion to approve the minutes for September 29th.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. There we go. You're welcome. All right. Moving on. Let's jump. We do, just to let everybody know, we're going to do the warrant articles for CPC, and then Blythe will be joining us in just a little while when we're done with that. I have a few things to discuss from last week's meeting and also how we're going to handle the advisory board meetings and the way that advisory is structured come the spring. It obviously doesn't pertain to this since this is our second to last meeting, but it will impact everyone going forward. So, but let's do the CPC first because we need to wait for Blythe anyway. So, all right. Erica, can you post the warrant articles that we're talking about? Can you screen share those for me?
Yep, 1 second.
Thank you. Okay. All right. We are discussing first up Article 6, which is to see if the town will vote to transfer from the CPC fund 20,000, 10,000 from the open space fund and 10,000 from the undesignated reserve fund for a 5-year weed control program to restore 10 acres of Mirror Lake within the town and anything that relates to that. This is because of, if I remember right, and Cindy, I would assume, can speak better to this. I believe this was what we discussed a couple of years ago when the Rentham side did it, and we shared the cost of the vehicle or the truck that they were using. So I believe some people had questions pertaining to this, not about doing it, but just about whether or not other towns are going to be sharing it and the number of residents that it affects. So Cindy, do you have anything to discuss with this article?
Yes, I mean, this is not a vehicle program. This is predominantly a treatment program. And Rentham has already started treating Mirror Lake, its portion of Mirror Lake, but the Norfolk portion, which is about 10 acres, including where you access the water, has become so weed choked that it's inaccessible. And the Mirror Lake, Friends of Mirror Lake, whatever, I'm sorry, I'm not have their formal name, came before us back in like July, August, and discussed a treatment plan. We had had some preliminary discussions prior to that. And the treatment that will be done in Norfolk will be done in conjunction with what is being done in Rentham, so that while the costs will not be shared per se, they will be kept down because, it's going to be across a broad portion of lake. So I asked Doug Surratt and Michael Carr to join us tonight because they are from the Mirror Lake, Friends of Mirror Lake. And they are the ones that are way more knowledgeable than me about what they have proposed.
Okay.
Would you like us to join in?
Sure. Do you have anything to add before we start asking questions?
Sure. I
Okay.
just wanted to clarify a couple of things. We've actually been treating weeds in the Rentham side. By the way, my name is Doug Surratt, sorry. We've been treating weeds on the Rentham side for a number of years, and we're now in the second of 2-3 year order of conditions approved with Rentham and funding to treat the majority of the lake. We never actually treated the Norfolk side. And frankly, the weeds on the Norfolk side weren't as bad until the last couple of years. Last year, we didn't do anything because of COVID. And then we had a severe outbreak, which interestingly enough was mostly, not completely, but mostly on the Norfolk side. I also want to point out that there is some cost sharing involved here in that Rentham is paying for the treatment on their side as they have been doing the last few years. And this cost is for your side. However, the cost sharing is that the company Water and Wetlands that we are using for the treatment on the Rentham side has a cost per day to come out and treat the lake. This proposal shares that cost of that 1-day treatment plan by not having 2 separate dates for that treatment. So the proposal is reduced by a few $1,000s because of that. So this is simply for the 10 acres of treatment that would be from the Norfolk line over to the beach and the waterfront area that was referred to.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any questions? I know there were some raised when Blythe was here originally.
So I had a question, I think, back then. So this sounds like it's actually not the water chestnut problem we had before, which was a physical extraction mechanism. What is the treatment? Is it chemical or physical? What's going on?
Good question. Yeah, it is not a extraction plan of any kind. The weed that infiltrated the northern part of the lake, which is including the Norfolk part, is called curly-leaf pondweed. And curly-leaf pondweed grows from the bottom in the spring, in the early spring, and becomes 4 or 5 feet tall. And the treatment for it is a product called Diquat, which we submitted to this group, the details about that earlier in the year. Diquat's a liquid chemical that gets spread into the water around the weeds, and it actually burns and kills the weeds and they drop to the bottom. So the key to this is that every spring, these weeds will continue to come back. They spread their seeds through a type of a nodule that grows on the end of the weed. Those ends of the weeds drop down to the bottom and they winter over, and then they come back in April and May and into the early part of June, which is when we treated the Rentham side in early June when it had become extremely bad. And our plan this next year is to coordinate with you and the Rentham side so that we treat it at the appropriate time when the weeds are starting to grow aggressively. And basically we'll treat the entire, both sides of the lake, including your side, which again, we've never treated before. So part of the problem is we've been treating one end of the lake and controlling weeds there fairly well. We haven't been controlling anything on the Norfolk side. And now these weeds are very much like dandelions. They spread seeds everywhere. And now they've kind of taken over more on the northern end of the lake. And in order for this to really work, we have to coordinate on both sides.
And Brian, hi, this is Michael Carr, 51 Mirror Lake Ave. One of the questions that you might have too as a follow-up to that would be Diquat. The chemical itself is renowned for being very environmentally safe towards wildlife, swimmers, etc. So it doesn't present any concerns there. That's typically, you know, even my neighbors, one of the first questions everybody has. So if that was a question, I just wanted to answer it.
Right. It's been approved by the state and the EPA.
Right, and I would interject as well that Water and Wetland, which is the proposed vendor, I guess, for lack of a better word, they'd be going before conservation and getting all of the appropriate approvals from the Conservation Commission in Norfolk before anything began.
So my follow-up question would then be, do you anticipate this being an annual expense that we should just budget for as a town? Or is this a one-time expense that is more appropriate to be a separate article?
We, when they came before us, we asked for both a 3-year treatment plan and a 5-year treatment plan, knowing that 1 year is not going to do it, from past experience with other lake treatment programs that the town has done. And so they presented both to us, and we decided, we have a conservation member, of course, who's a member of the community preservation, that to go with the 5-year plan. And I will say, however, that as with any of these plans, if things are controlled after 4 years and you don't need to go to the 5 years, it won't be done unless it's necessary. But it was safer.
That's correct. And also, I believe in the proposal from Water and Wetland, it says it's not to exceed.
Right.
So what we will do is every year, and we've been doing this in Rentham now for multiple years, we have Water and Wetland come out in the early spring and assess the lake and determine how much of the lake needs to be treated. Frankly, in some years it's less, in some years it's more. This past year was an extreme example of more. We're hoping that it doesn't have to be that again, but Water and Wetlands suggestion is that likely because the weeds were so dense earlier in the year, the number of those seeds have fallen to the bottom, and there's likely a need to do it again this coming year. If we get it early enough in the year, and again, I use the example of dandelions in your yard, if you can kill them before all the seeds start flying all over the place, your chances of control are much better, and that's what our goal is this coming year. But we will limit it to whatever is required, and that's based on the analysis that they will do each spring.
So the 20,000 covers all 5 years?
Yes.
Thank
That's
you.
correct. And the reason that isn't a higher number, again, is because included in that number, and you can think of this as a gift from Rentham if you want, Rentham is actually paying for the labor for that day to come out and do the work. You're only paying for the treatment and the chemicals.
And I'll just add that Water and Wetland is already doing project in Norfolk. They've been treating Highland Lake, and they've done so, and it's been very successful thus far. So it's just kind of an ad there.
Yeah, and I'll jump in and say the Rentham side of the lake is looking wonderful because of the work they're doing. That's the other reason it's really important that we combine these two programs together in some way.
Who's paying for the Highland Lake treatment?
We are.
That was a warrant article. I'm going to vaguely say a few years ago, Norfolk.
It was 3 years ago, I think. Arthur had to recuse himself because he lives on Highland Lake.
Right.
And that was water. Was that water chestnuts? Cindy, can you remember? That was.
It was in part water chestnuts. Yes.
Was that CPC funding?
Yes.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Can I
ask, is there public access to Mirror Lake?
Yes,
Where is that located?
Mirror Lake Avenue, right next to Mike's house.
Okay.
There's a boat ramp, and believe it or not, there's actually a little beach area.
A little beach, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
sorry, I was muted, but yes, I live at 51 Mirror Lake, and then there's one more house after me, which I believe is 53 Mirror Lake, and then there's the public access. There's a beachfront, and then there's a boat ramp, another maybe 75 yards up from that. That's all technically town property.
Okay,
Yes.
great, thank you.
David, go ahead.
Is the ownership actually the town? And was there any discussion with any of the residents who will obviously benefit significantly from this, from contributing in any way, shape, or form?
We've confirmed, yes, that it is in fact town land. The DPW actually maintains it.
Okay.
They actually do, work on it every spring, a little bit in the fall, etc. Manage the garbage pickup and actually the water spillway that's there because it's a spring-fed lake and there's a little dam. They manage that for the water levels. So yeah, there's a very documented history of the town's ownership and all the various challenges that go back about 100 years. Your other question regarding residents on the lake, we do, and Doug, maybe you could help me out with this one. We do a little bit of self-funding, obviously not to this magnitude. We've done a lot of things. We do try to raise some money, but it's certainly pale in comparison to what we need to actually professionally service the lake. The last few years, it's probably no secret to most, all lakes in the Northeast have been environmentally under attack. And you'll see, if anybody's familiar, a good example would be maybe Turnpike Lake in Plainville. If anybody ever drives over Route 1 in that way, and you got Turnpike Lake on either side of you, and you can basically walk across it in parts of the summer. So certainly late in the summer, with lily pads, weeds, and all sorts of issues because it goes untreated. And that's obviously what we're trying to avoid here. But it's a condition it's rampant, unfortunately, throughout the entire northeastern seaboard.
Right, and just to add the comment, in Rentham, this past year, we went from treating 10 acres or less to over 30 acres. And while the town CPC funds were used for some of that, we actually, through our membership, which is totally voluntary, by the way, and there's no requirement for people to join and pay a certain amount of money, we actually raised a number of thousands of dollars through our fundraising efforts to help pay for that, because frankly, we had not originally budgeted the 30 acres. And when we saw the condition of the lake, we frankly went into emergency mode earlier this year. And we were fortunate between the town's, the Rentham CPC funds and contributions from people who live on the lake, we were able to fund it, because it was something to the tune of $7,000 or $8,000 to treat the Rentham side this year alone.
So the lake is, correct me if I'm wrong, Doug, but about 3 parts Rentham, 1 part Norfolk, and the boat ramp, which gets a lot of use in the summer from residents of the town, is wide open for anybody to come in and dump their boat in for the day, and many do, as is the beach. There's no restrictions. It says it's a town beach, but swim at your own risk. And that also, if you come by on 4th of July, you'll see it. You won't see a grain of sand. There'll be a lot of people on it. So
right, it's very well used. Yeah, it's very well used, not only by the people who live on the lake, but frankly, people that live all around the lake, because it's a small beach area, and frankly, it's quiet, and the lake doesn't have the traffic that you see on some of the bigger lakes. So frankly, I've met people from many of the towns all around who use that lakefront area and use the boat access to come in.
So this is a great pond, I'm assuming. It's technically owned by the Commonwealth, not by either one of the towns, the land underneath the pond. Okay, you want to answer that question?
I don't know if it's officially designated that or not. I've never looked into that.
Yeah, I don't know, Dave. I know that it is controlled by a dam mechanism, so I'm not sure if it qualifies as a great pond.
Some great ponds are dammed ponds.
They are dammed
but,
ponds,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is important to note that the dam that Mike referred to, which is controlled by Norfolk DPW, actually goes into the Charles River estuary area and goes up into what's the park up in town there?
Stony Brook.
Stony Brook, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
he
one
did-
of the good resources about information on the lake, who's done a lot of history, is our recent DPW director, Blair Crane. He's done a lot of homework on the lake, and I don't know, maybe if we want to get to the bottom of that, he went back years and years and years to research, and he might be a good resource for those type of things too down the line, questions like that.
Right.
Sorry, any other questions? Well, that was quick. That's the only article by CPC, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Nobody else has any questions about this? Okay, so check before we let them go. So I'm just texting Blythe to let her know that we're ready for her, so she can jump in. She was in another meeting, so she just needed some warning for when we were ready. She has a transfer that she would like for us to go over that just came up. I'm sorry, I'm misspeaking. It might not be a transfer. It might be an unpaid bill.
It is.
So,
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So really quickly, even before, I'm sorry, let me get back to my screen. I'll just go over the articles really quickly. Thank you, Cindy and Friends of Mirror Lake, for coming and answering our questions.
Thank you very much.
All right, well, thanks for having us.
I appreciate it. You're welcome to stick around, but now we go to the boring stuff.
Oh, we'll see you at town meeting.
Yeah, thank you.
All right,
Thank
take
you.
care, everybody.
Appreciate it.
All right, I want to try to move through some of these as quickly as possible. I am waiting for Blythe, but just really quickly, I want to make sure before next week, because next week we're going to vote. I just want to make sure that there's no open questions that anyone has or information needed before we vote, so that we can move through the vote fairly quickly, assign the warrant articles, because we only have a couple days to turn those around. I kind of made some cliff notes. I may have worded these wrong, so correct me if I am, but Article 1 is unpaid bills. Article 2 is transfers. Article 3 is capital expenses. Article 4 is transfers for capital expenses. Nothing on Article 5. Article 6 is the CPC weed control that we just discussed. Article 7 is the cemetery, the 100 plots, the money's coming from the cemetery. I'm probably not wording it right, but basically the cemetery reserves. Article 8 is road acceptances. I believe it was Frederickson and Oakview Trail, that little road in between there. And there might have been, I'm not looking at the warrant in front of me. So I just wrote road acceptances down. So I think it's just those two. Article 9 is the solar project on Sharon Ave for the ground lease portion of the program. Article 10 is for the rooftop solar project on top of the police station. Article 11 is the floodplains bylaws that we went over last week. And I know there were people that had questions, and Erica forwarded you today a map of Norfolk, of where the residents are that are affected by basically a floodplain map of Norfolk, as well as some other information from Rich. So if you did have any questions, hopefully that answered them, but if not, let me know. Article 12 is the sign on Town Hill, the backlit LED lit sign, internally lit sign, sorry. And Article 13 is the stormwater article that we also went over last week with Rich and people had questions on, and some more information was also emailed about that today. I believe the planning board discussed the sign last night. I don't know if there's anyone on here who knows how that turned out. Kevin, are you privy to any of that information for how the planning board meeting went last night discussing this sign?
I do.
Oh, hi, Blythe. Thank you.
Hey,
I just want to make sure that we got everyone's questions answered before last week, before next week. So.
oh, sure. So I was at the meeting for a couple of reasons last night. They did vote on both the floodplain and the sign bylaw. They voted unanimously to recommend the floodplain, and they voted 3-1 on the sign bylaw.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Blythe on on the sign conversation from last week? Because I know that even though Rich spoke about it from the planning board perspective and brought it to us, I shouldn't say he wasn't in support of it. That's not a good characterization. He was not really privy to the inner workings of what it was going to be used for and how it's going to be used. So does anyone have any questions for Blythe now that she's here on the
Blythe,
sign?
I do have a question. You said the vote was 3-1. It reminds me of the old joke about the baseball score was 4-2. What side won? Like, was it 3-1?
Oh, I'm sorry, in favor of it, 3-1.
Okay.
Yeah, that's.
Sorry about that.
Thanks.
I mean, the conversation last night generally was about the fact that right now we have a website which we're working to replace to get public information out, but otherwise we take the two trailer mounted signs that we have, we move them around town, we reprogram them occasionally to tell people it's election day or we're looking for snowplow drivers or whatever, and that doesn't seem to be an efficient way to do it. And it's not a consistent way. So if we could put in a tasteful, appropriate for Norfolk sign that could be managed by, a department, mine or otherwise, to be regularly providing people with, a little bit of information as they drive by, that might be a better solution than what we do today. If continuing to provide more information is better to people. I can relate to my own community. We have one at a T intersection in Westboro, and it's a rotating thing from, hey, there's a parade on Saturday, to be kind, cars in the rotary have the right of way, which got me a laugh last night. To it's town meeting, or it's an election, or school needs substitute teachers, whatever it is, it's a combination of helpful reminders for people and news they should be aware of. And so the thought was maybe that would be a better outcome, and it was driven for town government sorts of things that people might need to know. It's another tool in the toolbox, perhaps better than the way we do it today.
Can I ask, can you share any comments on the dissenting vote? What was the rationale behind the no?
I think there was a concern of whether we really needed something like this, whether that was the appropriate way. There was some conversation about, whether, is this just for the public? Should the whole sign bylaw be considered for other types of signs for businesses and that sort of thing? And I also think there was some consideration to maybe this doesn't pass a town meeting, but maybe it's a good segue for people to be able to weigh in on signs overall and find out what, take the community's temperature about whether this is a bigger topic that the town should work on for both the town's use and for businesses that have signs.
Blythe, I know you weren't here last week, but that sort of second half of your comment was basically the thrust of my own and think Jonathan's comments, is that the sign bylaw might need a bigger, broader view than this, and it seems sort of like a lot of. I feel uncomfortable exempting the municipality from a sign bylaw that, by all accounts, the general business community doesn't like that much.
And we saw it from a staff perspective. It was, there's got to be a better way to do what we do than how
Yeah.
we're doing it. And, if the general consensus is no, this is not the right time, or not just for the community, that's not the town, it's not right, that's an okay outcome. But there was one comment last night, and I think it was by the chair, that, sometimes government does need to be able to do some things, and maybe this would be okay. I'm probably not describing what Walter said exactly correctly. But for me, if it gets the whole conversation going for the community about what we should do about signs, that's not a bad outcome. And staff's feelings won't be hurt if this doesn't go forward. But, part of our job, I think, is to bring forward suggestions and see what the town's ready to do or not do. So.
Okay. All right. So Michael and Kristen both need to hop off early tonight. So I'm trying to get through things quickly that are going to pertain to everybody that we kind of all need to be a part of. First thing is, in last week's meeting, I was having a conversation with Rich that pertained to something we spoke about offline, and I did not explain it thoroughly online, in where I shared, exactly what I was trying to convey. Rich knew what I was saying because we had spoke about it, but I forget sometimes that these are recorded and watched on YouTube later. And it was brought to my attention that I was incorrect in the way that I was wording it. And I went back and I watched it. And even though I wasn't, it wasn't conveyed that way because I was sort of speaking in shorthand. So I would like to be more clear on what I said. I was referring to something that was brought to my attention last spring with the way conservation is run. When a permit is filed with conservation, again, I am not the town administrator, so I am only speaking to what I was told. I'm not saying this is fact. What I was told was that Massachusetts says that you have 21 days from when someone files a permit for something, say a septic, with conservation, because they're in conservation land. Conservation Committee has 21 days to give them a public hearing. So, but because conservation only meets once a month, what happens is you have to apply 2 weeks prior to get on their agenda. So for example, if you want to be on the March 14th agenda, you have to apply by March 1st for your permit. So anyone who applies for a permit from March 2nd to March 20th, so to speak, would not get a hearing within 21 days because they would not be eligible for a hearing until the April meeting. So when I said that conservation was not in compliance, that's what I was referring to. Not that by not having a meeting twice a month is what they're not in compliance for. It was just specifically this 21-day rule. So I want to be very clear about that. I was not trying to say that conservation has to have meetings every 2 months. I mean, every twice a month. I was saying that in the specific instances where someone applies for a permit within this window, that's where it's not in compliance, from what I understand. However, no one ever complains, because if you complain, from what I understand, it triggers an automatic 60-day hold. So anyway, my point is,
I think what you just said makes it worse about what you said last week. I'm sorry.
Fine. That's fine. And that's fine. But it was brought to my attention that it was not conveyed correctly. So what I'm trying to do is make sure that I am conveying it correctly. If anyone still has problems with what I said, that's fine. It is what it is. I just want it clear that I am about what I was actually trying to say. So with that said, that is all that I will bring up about that. The second point that was brought to my attention was that last week's meeting with Rich McCarthy was rather contentious. I think there was some frustration on the part of the advisory board. There was probably some frustration on the part of Rich McCarthy. I would like to apologize to Rich because regardless of how contentious a topic is, no one should ever feel disrespected when they come before us. With that said, I would like Blythe to be here tonight to discuss the process moving forward. It is very frustrating to people on the advisory board when we feel that questions cannot be answered in a timely manner. So with that said, I would like to discuss with Blythe the new process moving forward of how I think it should run. She can weigh in on whether that's possible. And then I would also like to go back to, and people who've been on the board for a long time understand this, but we used to do it where everyone who served on the advisory board was a liaison to another board. So we're going to institute that again, because at the very least, if someone shows up and isn't able to answer questions, we have a member on the advisory board who has been in contact with them, who knows what's going on. Do I mean that you have to attend every school committee meeting? Absolutely not. Do you need to be in contact with the chair of the school committee to know what's on their agenda and know what they're putting forth in a warrant, or same for CPC and same for planning board and zoning and all of that? Yes. Again, you don't need to attend every one of their meetings. It will be left up to you how you manage it, but we will be looking to you when those articles come before us and saying, hey, so-and-so, you're the liaison. What was discussed? How did the vote go down? Who dissent, like Brian just asked, who was the dissenting vote? Was it unanimous? Things like that. Because being surprised by things on the warrant and then also not being able to have all of our questions answered is not really the function of the advisory board. We are here to ask the right questions, get the right answers, and then make an appropriate recommendation in a timely manner. So those are the things that I'm going to discuss tonight with Blythe and you guys. I know a couple people may have to jump off when you need to, but just know that this will go into effect for the spring. So next week after we vote, or we'll hold an additional meeting if we need to. If the time runs long next week, we can do it, a couple weeks after town meeting. But moving forward, everyone will have a board that they are going to be liaison to and responsible for getting information back. So if someone would like to volunteer for a specific board next week or the week after, whenever we do this, that's great. If we end up not getting volunteers, then we'll just start assigning liaisons the way we used to do it. That's the way it was done 4 years ago when I joined. They wrote your name down in a space, and there you were. You were the school committee or planning board person, and that's how it worked. So we're going to go back to that. Before we get into the details with Blythe, does anyone have any questions? No? Okay.
Wait, Susan, I think it's a good idea. I'm in support of the idea. I'm just not sure how it ties back to the problem last week, because maybe you could help me with that.
It doesn't necessarily tie back specifically to the problem last week. It does in general tie back to if there's a situation where Blythe isn't available or Rich isn't available, or if they don't have that, someone on this board would be able to step up and say, hey, their planning board met already. No, they didn't. This is how they voted. This is when they're voting. Because the person who's coming doesn't always have all of that information at the ready. It can also be something that you can speak to in more detail because you're part of the advisory board. So therefore you're watching these. And again, you don't have to attend the meetings. You just might have to catch them on YouTube, be in contact with the chair to know what their agenda is. A lot of times, like for example, this one and then one last spring, they're on the warrant, but the boards haven't even discussed them or voted on them yet. And that's one of the things I want to talk about Blythe with tonight is that's not okay. we can't be expected to discuss and vote on something without knowing how the board that's recommending it is going to vote. We also need someone on the advisory board who can speak to the inner workings and their schedule and their routine and what they're looking for. And it used to work that way, and I think it should go back to working that way. And again, I'm not looking to drain anyone's time here. I'm not saying, some of these boards meet, like, for example, if you were the select board person, they meet twice a month year round. No one is expecting anyone to go to bi-monthly select board meetings, but we would be expecting that someone on this board is in contact with Kevin Calcutt or whoever it is, and just sort of knows what's on their agenda. And then if there's something that's going to drastically impact the advisory board, you would attend that meeting or at least watch it on YouTube so that when we meet, you can speak to it. That's more what I'm looking for, is someone on this board who is connected to another individual board. And that's as far as that piece of it goes. As far as how it pertains to last week, Erica, also, I'd like to start where, since you're the one that does the agenda for us and knows who's coming each week, that all of the boards will know to reach out to you, and any of the presenters will know, but also just a few days before, touching base with whoever's coming and asking for any documentation, because if they forget to bring it or aren't prepared, at least we'll have yours as a backup. We'll have the information. You will have been presented with the information prior to the meeting, so that at the very least you have, say, for example, the floodplains or the stormwater or whatever it is, the maps at your fingertips, so that you can provide that. And I think it also will help trigger their memory, so to speak, on what they may need, versus just leaving it up to each individual person to come prepared. So that's just a quick email each week beforehand to see if anyone has documentation for us ahead of time.
Sure.
Blythe. As far as how we can handle this process going forward, I jotted down a few notes. One of the things that I was thinking about is there's two ways that the advisory board can be run. And it's more about making sure that we're doing it the way you want it done, because you're the town administrator. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, and I don't mean this to come off in any way other than how I'm saying it, but the two ways that I see the advisory board can be run is that it's a perfunctory part of town meeting where we do the required things, we listen to a little bit of presentations, and we make a vote based on solely the way the person bringing us the warrant article wants us to vote. And we're just here to perform the service. The other option is what I thought we were, which is an avenue to ask all of the questions, get all of the information, to discuss it, and to actually make a difference in the way that things are voted on. I guess I just want to make sure that we're handling it the way that the town wants us to handle it. Meaning, are we an important part of the process? And if we are, then we need information to be available to us, and we need to have the other boards. How do I say this? I don't want to say it in a way that doesn't sound nice, but take us seriously, I guess, is the best way to say that. And it's not really how I mean it. I'm just not
I understand.
able to come up with another word that fits the situation at this moment. But if that's what we want, if we want that to be the role of the advisory board, then we need to change the process. If we don't, and we want us to just perform a perfunctory service, then we can just keep going the way we are. So I guess that's kind of what I want some direction from you on, is how do you see us moving forward, and how can we change the process?
So I think that the second way is, I would agree with you. That's what I think an advisory committee should be. You're an independent voice appointed by the moderator to give the citizenry at town meeting your collective 9 voices on things coming before them, so they can hopefully have the have confidence that you've looked at the information, the data, whatever, and made a recommendation that they can rely on. So how do we get to that? I mean, I think the general process of opening a warrant, going through and gathering the information, getting to the warrant being mailed out and getting to town meeting is pretty straightforward. I'm just got the calendar up on my other screen, and we started July 20th this year for November 9th, so about 3.5 months. I probably would have done it sooner in July, except for that's the only select board meeting we had, so that it's when it happened. But I think what would be.
Oh, so I was just saying, so seeing that the warrant was opened on July 20th, it's October 13th and the planning board had their public hearing last night.
So
that's
before that, if you know,
timing.
well, I mean, I think it's an awareness by everybody. I mean, at the end of on September 1st, the articles were due. So these committees were working on these things beforehand. They had to decide they were going to be ready to have an article before town meeting, you know, ready to go right after that. I think that's an opportunity, you know, for maybe your liaisons to stay aware of what's going on so that, you know, you're not surprised that there's going to be a floodplain bylaw, and maybe, you know, the liaison can go to a meeting or staff can come to advisory and say, here's what we're working on. The public hearing is whenever it is, and you can be asking the questions before we get to that final point. It might take a little bit more work of the individuals or an extra meeting or two of advisory to say, hey, we want to see X people before a certain point. So we're involved along the way, not at the end, which is what it feels like this year. Right.
Well, I think that, you know, this is also a scheduling thing. Like if we're asking someone to come before us, say, I'm just going to use it as an example, say we're asking Kevin to come before us because we have some questions about the way the select board's voted. When we request him to come, he should be able to say, okay, I'll come, but it would be best if I come this particular Wednesday because we will not have voted on it yet. And I think that's part of it. Like no one knew when we were scheduling this, even Rich didn't say, hey, I'll come, but it'd be better if I came on the 13th because the public hearing's on the 12th.
Sure. I mean, I think we need to get more people involved in that. Like when we first met on September 8th, we decided not to meet again until I think the 28th or 29th. And we didn't know when that hearing was. So I'd say, you know, maybe it's a little more work that we're meeting more often during the spring or fall, but it's so that we can have that dialogue and get you those documents and get back to you with answers in a time that's less rushed.
It just feels like the last few years, couple of years, but the last few town meetings that we've had there's always something that's working this way. Obviously, we're always going to have transfers. We're always going to have last minute things. We're always going to have citizens petitions that come up at the last minute, things like that. But it seems like there's been a few where they're coming to answer questions, but they can't because they haven't had their public hearing. And that's happened a few times.
Well, they're the only ones having they're the ones having a public hearing. I mean, the select board changing a bylaw, that's, you know, that they're meeting more often. That's a little easier to do.
Correct.
Actually, they don't have to have a public hearing. Let me correct myself on that. So I think, you know, I also think that we can, as staff, we can be communicating with you and saying, hey, you know, this is, you know, what we're doing for the fall, but let us come talk to you about the things that we're working on for the spring, because we're already working on them. And a perfect example of that is codification of the bylaws. We got money for that 2 years ago. And we're finally getting to the point where we're ready to package that all up and bring it forward. And we need to have that to the company by like January in order to turn around for May. And so there's an opportunity in there to sit with you guys and say, here's what it means, here's what's coming. So again, we won't have the public hearing till later, but you're not surprised by it. You know what's happening. You can, your liaison can choose to watch a meeting or two or whatever it is.
This
a draft with you.
Yeah, this is what happened a few years back with the B1 stuff. we didn't, as a collective board, I'm not going to say there wasn't anyone on the board who knew, but as a collective board, we were surprised the first time the B1 stuff came through. That shouldn't happen. Something that big should not surprise us.
Right, so if we could have a meeting in, say, December, you know, before everyone scatters for holidays, and say, heads up, these are the things we think are coming, then the people who are following those boards or committees can know to look out for that stuff. And, you know, you and I can talk more often and say, hey, let's have a check-in. Let's meet in February and see how the budget's forming up, or what's going on with, you know.
I don't mind having those meetings one-off with you, so that the advisory board doesn't have to get, as a whole, doesn't have to get bogged down in those. And then I can just call for one meeting, you know, in January, and kind of give a heads up of what's coming, so that I do think having someone as a liaison, and again, it could just be email. It doesn't even have to be attending all of their meetings. It's just being, you know, for example, let's say, you know, let's say Jonathan is, you know, in charge of planning board. That just means the planning board includes him on emailing that goes and has when they have conversations about what they're going to put on the warrant. He does not need to be part of their everyday, you know, every week zoning meetings or every week planning meetings, or monthly, I should say.
And each of you are also more than welcome to reach out to me, you know, or to the department head and say, hey, I need some information on this or that. I'm curious what's going on. You know, that's part of what we're here for, is to help you with those things.
I don't want to speak for anyone else, so I don't know if this is something that's frustrating anyone else. I just know it frustrated me. So go ahead, Brian.
I'd love to jump in as well. I feel like over the last couple of years, there's been a couple of times where there's almost been placeholder warrants. And let me address it from not an advisory board issue, but from a citizen of the town, where there are specific requirements for me to get a citizen petition about when I have to get things in. But then I see other people can kind of put a placeholder so it meets the warrant close date, but then we can change the language all the way up into the end. It doesn't feel in line with the spirit of the process to get things on the warrant correctly. And then from the advisory perspective, when we are told that, oh, the language of this will be changing next week and the language will be changing next week, it is hard for us to do our business. And the way you describe the process, Blythe, I think is exactly right, where committees should be working on things and then bring that forward. But it feels like more often recently than prior, there have been placeholders put forward, and then the work that should be done prior to making a warrant motion has been happening afterwards. And so I think, in addition to everything Susan said about the way it complicates us doing our business, I think there's a concern from a person in the town. There's a dual process, one for everyone else. And then if you can get a committee to throw a placeholder on the warrant, and it buys you an extra two months of time to adjust what you want it to actually say. And that just doesn't feel right.
Well, I guess I feel like I need to counter that. I mean, I think it's the select board's warrant, and then they have the latitude to put things on them or decide something shouldn't stay on there. And, you know, as staff, you know, and I'll use the codification as an example, that was being handled by a staff person who has left the town. And I thought from talking to him that was ready to go for the general bylaws this fall. When he left and I dug into it, you know, realized we weren't ready. So I took it off the list. As opposed to a citizen petition, which we've all learned can come in up until the moment the warrant's actually executed. And we have no control over that unless we change our bylaws to be specific about how that has to happen and kind of tighten that up. You know, my impression in my 2.5 years is people aren't putting things on just to go, oh, geez, let's throw it on there and just play a game. But what happens is they give us the basic, they turn in, this is what we want to have an article on. And up until now, I've not required them to give us the exact language. Then I've given them 2 weeks or so to get that in, and then we work with town council to make sure that it's right. And so that's why you guys get first a list, then a draft warrant, and then it goes to town council, and he and I work out the nits and gnats over exactly how it's worded from a legal perspective. I mean, we can back that all up a little bit, you know, it's not set in stone exactly when we do it, but we do have some placeholders, like you mentioned. We're always going to do budgets at certain
Those are-
times, or, you know.
Yeah, I don't think he's talking about those. I think he's
So-
referring to, there was some, not on this one, but on, I believe it was last spring, that was just in there. And it might have not have even been last spring. It might have been the year before. We had one, because we might have still been meeting in person when it was there. And it was just like, basically, wasn't it Sean Dooley? Wasn't it said brought by Sean Dooley, I think, or brought by, it wasn't by the select board is what we're trying to
Oh,
say.
okay.
I remember what he's talking about. And
Well,
it
there was
was
that
like,
one.
gonna change who present, it was like Sean, I believe Sean put it in as just a placeholder for someone else. And then it was gonna end up being another board. They were just trying to figure out which board was gonna bring it forward. And I think that's kind of the type of thing he's referring to, not.
Well,
Yeah,
it
sorry, I don't
came up-
remember that one.
It came up last week because I asked Rich, what was the discussion about this? It says submitted by the planning board. And I said, so what was the discussion? And he said, oh, we haven't even talked about this. It was just the building commissioner wanted it on there, so we put it in. So that does not follow the process you laid out, Blythe, which is the right process. They have their meetings, they have their ideas, and they come up with ideas. This was an idea that came out of the blue, and then they were going to do all that discussion and think whether or not it was a good idea after it was already on the warrant.
And the problem with that, Blythe, for that specific one is the timing of it. We have to have our voting done by next week and our warrant articles, our recommendations written by next week. But we would have had to, if we had known that was happening, we would have had to wait until this week to discuss it with Rich or someone from the planning board. And in reality, we really should have been discussing it with either Bob Bullock or with you, because it's really it says planning board, but it was really a town issue.
Well, it's a
And we
zoning
didn't know
bylaw.
that. And we
It's a
didn't know
zoning-
that going in. We just see that it says planning board. So when Erica's setting the agenda, she says, okay, you know, and I say to her, take all of the planning board ones, lump them together and have Rich come on that night. Take all of the town ones and have them done by Blythe. So, I mean, those are the kinds of things. I mean, we could do this all night. We could go one off specific warrant articles. I think it's just more about the process. And
Right.
I feel like we have a very limited time. We usually have for fall town meeting about 3 weeks to interview people, and we try to lump people together. And then we have one night for voting and assigning articles. That gives us 4 weeks. So you back up 4 weeks from when we need it. We're already at the end of September. We gave the warrant closed on September 1st. That was a month for them to hold everything and get information to us. And yet we still feel like we've got all these balls in the air and we don't have all the information.
So
We
I'm
have
happy to
make-
talk.
We have
I'm
to
happy to
vote by
talk
next
with them
week.
about the timing of their public hearing on these things.
Mhm.
And maybe that needs to be adjusted a little bit, but I would reiterate what I said earlier, which is there were 3 weeks in September when we could have had meetings and talked about some of these things, and we chose not to. Now,
But those were
when we
still before the
scheduled Rich
planning
to
board
come,
met.
we didn't know when the planning board hearing was, and we can do
Right.
better on that in the
Yeah.
future.
Well, wouldn't have
but-
mattered if we had met with Rich in September. He still would have said, I don't have the answers,
Well,
because they hadn't met yet.
actually, that's not fair. I had it on the list as a bylaw change. I think I described it incorrectly in the first time. I think Dave was the one going, are you sure about that, Blythe? I have a letter in the file from Bob Bullock recommending the bylaw change. You know, in hindsight, I should have sent that along just to help everyone understand. He did that as the zoning enforcement officer, you know, working for the planning board and the ZBA. It is going to be the planning board's article at the end of the day because they control zoning. So I think it's just a better educating everybody in exactly how that works and making sure we get that stuff to you sooner so you can choose to have additional meetings and we get the right people in front of you.
Yeah. I think that the overall point is not specifically trying to, at least from my end, I'm not specifically trying to call out Rich or,
Oh, I
or
understand.
Bob or you or anyone. I think it's just the overall process. I want to see moving forward. I want to see an advisory board that is prepared. And I also want to see representatives from both the town as well as other boards who are prepared.
Absolutely.
Now, what do we need to do to get there? I don't know. We'll have to discuss it over the winter before spring meeting. Because obviously there's nothing we can do about it right now. You and I can meet and start to come up with some ideas of how we can structure that. I mean, I think step one is having a liaison would be helpful, but also we just need to make a list of what documentation they need to bring and what possible questions we might have. I don't want to create a ton more work for the advisory board and a lot of times our conversations, I'll be honest with you, are off the cuff. So even if I said to the advisory board, what questions do you have? They might have one or two, but during the discussion, based on something someone says, creates a whole nother list of questions. So it's not like we can submit all of the questions ahead of time.
Oh, sure.
Well,
that's where an extra meeting or two to take a quick discussion about each one of these things might get those conversations going and help us get back to you before you're up against it.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to do that.
I think that the two things I'd like to see, if and when it's possible, is that respective boards who, and this goes for any respective board, unless timing dictates for the select board, they can't do it. I get that. But for the other boards, if they need to have a vote to put something on the warrant, that needs to be done before they come to us. And if we ask them to come to us and they haven't done that, it needs to be understood that they have to say, we haven't done this yet. We'll do it on this date and then we'll come to you on the next date. If the timing works out, great. If it doesn't, we're just going to have to say in the warrant, which I absolutely abhor doing, that we did not have all of the information in time, so we cannot make a recommendation. That's going to be the only way. We can't keep going around in circles and making ourselves crazy every town meeting time frame. So,
so generally for the spring, they're going to have to vote. Each board is going to have to vote and say, I don't have the schedule up in front of you, February, they want to put something on the warrant. So that's, I think, the first signal for you and I to sit down and go, okay, here's what's coming. Either we talked about it, in December, we gave you a heads up, or now we really know these are the CPC articles, these are the planning board articles, and we can map out that.
If they do end up needing to have a public hearing, I think we need to have, if at all possible, a drop dead date for when they have to have their public hearings by.
Sure.
And then we're privy to that information. Yep. I also think it's sometimes we're just not privy to this information. I don't know who is supposed to be getting this information. Maybe it's me. And if it is, I apologize, to everyone. I don't know who's supposed to be saying to us, hey, planning board is voting on that, so don't schedule them till later. I mean, we just need more communication and a better process is the gist of it.
Well, so, I can tell you one of the things that we're working on, we just started is looking to launch a new website for the town, because the one we have built in-house is kind of basic and there's just some things it doesn't do. The federal ARPA funds can be used to pay for it, which is awesome. But one of the things that any website should be able to do these days is to sign up, subscribe to whatever type of news or agendas you want to get. And so who's ever the liaison could subscribe to get what's being put out by these boards and have it come to you. Hey, there's a meeting on Wednesday from conservation, and here's the agenda sent right to your email or your text, help everybody keep more informed about things going forward, so that you're not hoping someone remembers to send it to you, or you remember to go look.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Does anyone have any questions or would like to weigh in on this? One more thing before that. I just want to make sure I've said everything. I want to be very clear. And I'm part of one of the ones who does it, so I definitely enjoy it. I think that having a well-informed advisory board who asks questions, who debates, who argues, who even gets worked up and lets their frustration be known is a fantastic thing, because it shows that we care about the town, and it shows that we're invested. But I do not want anyone who comes before the advisory board to ever feel disrespected. So as much as I want fiery and heated debate, just like in real life, that fiery and heated debate needs to be as respectful as possible so that no one feels slighted. I'm not saying anyone did. No one told me that they felt that way. I just have an inclination. So, does anyone have any questions or anything they'd like to say, or any discussion on what we've just discussed? Nothing? Okay. Well,
Can I chime in on just one thing?
yes.
It's Jackie.
Hi, Jackie.
Hi, everyone. I guess like I don't disagree with like anything that you said or how people presented their point of view. I guess I just wonder in my head, is there a middle ground between a perfunctory group that just is a yes group and a group that is delving into every single detail to the end of where we're not letting, or where, I guess to me, the people who are on these boards are authorities in the subject matter and are obviously going to have or should have a deeper understanding. And I guess I just feel like there is a middle ground that wasn't really discussed in this conversation that exists.
Okay. Like, do you have like a way to do that?
I mean, like, I think like I guess it kind of goes back to the earlier comment, like, no, I don't have a solution off the top of my head, but it feels like a problem that we're having is in general with how local government in Norfolk works, right? Like there's a problem with the way that the timeline moves forward. And I guess I think a solution would be, and this obviously is not a great idea long-term, but like until some kinks can get worked out, saying the advisory board didn't have time to make a decision on this article because it was presented to them or information was not available before the last meeting, to me feels like a middle ground that we haven't talked about as much, that can exist to me. And I understand that would not achieve the goal that you mentioned and what Blythe agreed with, of like a board that is intense and critical and really digging deep into every single piece of every single warrant article. But I think like we're always going to be wanting, because of the way local government functions, which is like slow and clearly like in some ways like waiting longer than we might feel it's necessary to have meetings and make decisions and do those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like I'm thinking of as a teacher, like, right, kids procrastinate. So it feels a little like people are procrastinating. They're like, oh, we'll figure this out like the week before town meeting. And it's like, that's not really that helpful to us. But like, to me,
well, I think that's going to be the natural consequence, right? Moving forward, we're going to have liaisons to the boards who are hopefully going to say, for example, please don't think I'm assigning anything to anyone, I'm just using this example. If you were, say, the planning board liaison, you would be able to email them and say, hey guys, I just noticed you scheduled your public hearing for October 13th. That's after we need to vote. So if that's what you're doing, we're going to have to put it in the warrant that advisory can't make a recommendation. And then those are going to be the natural consequences of that, because we can't control what anyone else does. We can only control how the information is coming to us. So we can ask Blythe to, convey to the other boards the seriousness of getting information to the advisory board in a timely manner and holding their public hearings in time, and letting them know that if they don't, they will be showing up for town meeting without a recommendation, which if you look at statistically, I'm not trying to toot our own horn or anything, but statistically, the town votes the way the advisory board recommends. I'm not saying there's never been one-offs where it's been different, but in general, it does follow the advisory board recommendation. So if there is no advisory board recommendation, they're going to have to sell their own article at town meeting, which I think in the long term, they would not like. So hopefully these kinks will all work themselves out with exactly that, the natural consequence of not having our recommendation.
Susan, can I interrupt here? I worry a little bit about the way that we are maybe talking about this in a way that is not, and I don't know if this is where Jackie was heading, but I don't want to feel paternalistic to the people that are doing this work day in and day out. And I do want to make sure that if, we have had liaisons, that's not new, but if we start to talk about liaisons in a way that is us kind of embedding in a certain way in people's work, I want to be sure it's seen in a way that is helpful and a partnership and not paternalistic is what I can think of. It's not what I really mean, but I just want to make sure that it's seen in a way that we are intending it to be seen and not in a way that is undermining their work.
I think that a lot of boards have liaisons. Like, for example, Kevin is here. He comes to almost all of our meetings and stays fairly regularly in contact with me. And I'm assuming he did with Arthur when Arthur was the chair as well. And he rarely says anything, and he only, really puts his 2 cents in when we ask him to. And I think that's how I see the liaison to those boards running. Not that you would ever be injecting yourselves into them, but maybe just giving them a heads up of how our agenda is set. So if they want to be on our agenda, they would need to do it in a timely manner. And then also reporting back to the advisory board of kind of what they're doing or what they're discussing and what we have coming down the pipeline. I don't see, if you're a liaison, of you being there and being an integral part of their meetings and giving opinions and feedback to them on a regular basis. That's not how we've done it in the past. That's not how I see it being done. It's more of a information pipeline than anything else. And, I'm sure if you were in a meeting and they had a question that pertained to advisory, they would certainly ask you, just like we do with Kevin. But I don't see it. I see how it could be perceived that way if it's explained that way, but I don't think that it's ever been explained that way. I don't think that's ever been the way it is. I don't think anyone's expecting that. I think that when Blythe, explains it to the different boards, that she will hopefully explain it to them, that says, this is just an information avenue for you to make sure that everyone's agendas are lining up and everyone advisory has all of the information in time for spring meeting or in time for fall town meeting. And as long as it's explained that way, I don't think anyone's going to feel like we're busting in and, taking over their stuff, so to speak.
So I hear those as two different directives. And so, Susan, I want to hear like where you and Blythe are falling on which of those. Like, one is logistical. Hey, here when our meetings are, this is your agenda. I'm noticing that there's a timeline issue.
Mm-hmm.
Versus, hey, Jackie, what's going on with planning board?
Mm-hmm.
And then I have to basically summarize what I can. And I know we haven't assigned, I'm just saying, if I got planning board, I am generally like processing at a much slower speed of understanding all the pieces. And I really wouldn't feel comfortable coming to advisory board and speaking as the, like, if the liaison is supposed to be like the expert on what's happening, that would make me really uncomfortable. And I feel like we keep saying things like, this is just how I understood what the planning board was talking about. And I guess I just would be worried. It goes to, Kristen is kind of right, is that's where I was feeling it was a little bit, like, I guess it just depends how you see this role of liaison. I just don't want to be in a position where it's like, we are experts on what's being presented and are expected to know all the ins and outs to then present to advisory committee. What I was hearing originally was like, is it supplement? I guess I just would want a more clear definition of what that is. And like you were saying, like that really clearly presented to whatever board we were assigned.
Yeah. So first, the way I think it should be is everyone on the advisory board has sort of the way Jay Tallerman has structured us is everyone sort of has their niche, right? So to speak. For example, you're a teacher, correct? Or an educator in the field. So you would most likely be a best fit for one of the school committees. And again, what does the school committee bring before us? The budget. So what would you need to do? You would need to be in contact with Ingrid Alardi or the school committee just to know when she's going to present her budget, maybe watch it on YouTube and report that back to us. And just if there's an issue with an agenda, you could speak to them, but otherwise that's probably the extent of what that liaison would do. Because that specific one, that's all they ever bring before us. If you're like David, for example, and your expertise is in energy and technology and zoning and you would probably be with one of those types of boards. And everyone is sort of structured in that way. Everyone has something that Jay put you here for because it's what you're good at, right? So maybe I would be the person who's the liaison for the select board. So I would just stay in contact with the chair of the select board and say, hey, give me a brief overview of what you have coming. And so that I can speak to it when we have our meetings. Let me know if there's any kind of agenda conflicts, maybe tune into a couple of meetings that are going to pertain to something that the select board is presenting to us. But that's really it. Definitely not any kind of manager or experts. And no one would ever expect that someone who has zero knowledge of planning be in charge of the planning board, or zero knowledge of zoning be in charge of the zoning board. I mean, that's why I was hoping that everybody could volunteer in that sense, because everyone kind of knows what they're good at. There's also a lot less boards than there are members. So in some instances we could have that was a really bad decision. I just killed a stink bug in my house during this meeting. I apologize. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. In some of these, there would be 2 members is what I was trying to say. We have 9 members. There's only, I think, 6 boards that we would need a liaison for. So some of these are going to, I know that's the way it was before when we did it. I know I was one of the ones that was part of school committee. There was 2 of us who were school committee. So we kind of traded off, one went to one budget meeting, one went to another, and then that was pretty much all we did. It's really about making sure that there's a contact person and there is someone who can speak to the agenda. It's less about the technical inner workings of how those boards work. Again, no one's expecting anyone to understand or be able to explain the zoning bylaws, but I would want someone to say, hey, just so you know, I happened to be on the zoning call last week and they're not going to vote on that till November, right? That's the kind of information that I'm looking for. And someone to say, I don't really know what they were saying, but they discussed it and it was a 3-2 vote. And then that's really the end of it. They are the experts. When they're presenting a warrant article, they're going to come to us. But having someone on our board who has sort of kept track of them and their agenda and knowing what's coming down and prepares us, I think is a good thing to have. That's the way I see it being structured. I believe that's the way Blythe sees it. That's the way it used to be done in the past. Blythe, do you feel differently about that? Is that an okay explanation of how?
Yeah, I think that's a fine explanation. And I would just say the liaison can also, feel comfortable to go and contact that board chair or whatever, ask a question, ask for more information, not to become a subject matter expert, but to be exactly what the word means, a liaison between the 2 boards and being that conduit for the open communication to get to the decision point that advisory needs to make.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess like one thing I would be interested in, if as we move forward in this, obviously you mentioned like school committee just tends to be like, here's the budget, but like, I guess I would just want as liaisons, like, it's helpful when the people come in, obviously the people would still come in to present to us, right? I like the fact that I'm hearing a lot of these people without bias as I hear them for the first time, as I'm hearing their rationales. And a worry is that if we have liaisons preparing us or presenting us things prior to this, that a bias could could come through that then impacts how we interpret the presentation that's then presented. And to me, that is a moment where sometimes that hostility kind of happens.
Mhm.
It would just be something you know what I mean? Like the sign thing, for instance, someone presenting that who has the opinion that, you know, businesses should be able to do the same thing government does versus someone who's like, government should have this right that businesses don't. If they prepared us for that, I think there's a bias that they would bring to it that I think could impact how people hear then the presentation. And I guess I just want to acknowledge that, but also like, how can we work against that when I feel like one of our strengths is that we look at things with a critical eye and not just be like, oh, well, Brian says it's a good thing, so I'm just going to side with Brian.
Right. Well, I think that that's exactly what we have to make sure we're all able to do, that we are all able to look at it critically and think for ourselves on it, even if it disagrees with what the liaison has suggested to us. So I guess that's, you know, something that everyone's going to have to be aware of and know that that is a thing, that people tend to move one way and move another way based on the person presenting the information. With that said, I still think it's important that we have someone who is a representative of the advisory board that is just at least at a bare minimum in contact and sharing agendas, or aware of their agenda, meaning whether, like Blythe was explaining, your role as a liaison could be as small as subscribing to their agenda calendar and then notifying me or Erica or the person who is their chair or their secretary if there's an issue, if there's a timing issue. It could be as simple as that, and it could be as in-depth as it was when I was the B1 liaison, which is reporting back to the advisory board everything that was discussed in the B1 meetings. Again, no one is expecting that. That was actually a role, a position I was put in. That was not a liaison. It was expected that I attend every one of those meetings and be a part of that board. But I also did come back and give information. So, I mean, I think that how you personally, how Brian personally, how Kristen personally structures themselves as their liaison is up to them. How much additional work and interest and questioning you put into it is up to you. I just need someone who's in charge of that board, so to speak, not in charge of, but you know what I mean? Like in connection with, so that if we are all sitting here around a table and we're going, hey, what's school committee doing? If Blythe wasn't here to give us every single board's agenda, the person who's with school committee goes, oh, hold on, I have an email. They're voting for this on, March 5th. They have a public hearing on March 5th. Great. Thanks for that information. That's it. That's really, it can be as little involvement as that. And it can be as much involvement on the other end as someone wants it to be. If you have a love of conservation and you really love town meetings and you want to go to every conservation meeting, that you can. But I don't expect that from anyone. I just want someone who's a representative and in contact. And then how you go from there is up to you. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, be thinking about, for example, and again, I'm not saying this is the way it's going to go, but I know Kiara Moore has a background in immunology, I believe is how it was described to me. So maybe she wants to be the liaison for the Board of Health. Not saying she does. I'm just using that as an example. Be thinking about how you want to do it, and also really think about what your life is like. And if you can honestly say you don't have time for something as involved as zoning, then make that known and say, I need to be on a board where it's a 2-person liaison, right? Instead of a 1-person, and make sure that you're either splitting that with someone or it's one of the options that is going to require very little input from you. I certainly don't want anyone being assigned or volunteering for something that their life can't manage. I wouldn't want that for anyone. So please don't think that's the way I'm looking to do it. I'm not looking to saddle anyone with additional stuff. I just think that we need to be an informed advisory board. And this is a way to start that process. And we'll look at it again at the end of the spring. And if it went well and we felt like we were able to really stay on top of things and answer questions, then we'll keep doing it. If the feedback is, it didn't help the process at all, then we'll have that discussion as well.
Hey, Susan, can I weigh in with something?
Yes,
not to
please.
prolong this, but my comment on this is not what I'm about to say is not a statement of liaison or not to liaison. If we want to be liaisons, that's great. We'll learn more. We'll be more engaged. We can bring our perspectives back to this meeting. But I don't think being a liaison should ever replace hearing from whatever the board is directly.
Definitely not.
Under any circumstances. It'd be my preference we always hear directly from the board. And I wouldn't want to give any boards the perception that they don't need to come to present to us because there was a liaison there. So I think we can solve this really simply, going back to what the original problem is, and in my opinion, is we publish guidelines. We share this with all the boards, something along the lines of, we require each board with something on the warrant to present to us at a minimum 2 calendar weeks in advance prior to town meeting, which will give us adequate time in a non-fire drill way to discuss it, vote on it, write our recommendations, and move on. Obviously, there's a list of exceptions that we know about, which is the unpaid bills and transfers that we historically do the night of town meeting. So I'm not talking about those types of things. And in the cases when that deadline is not met for whatever reason, planning board doesn't meet in time, they can't get their act together, whatever the reason, we should have boilerplate language that we put in that doesn't say yes or no. It just says we vote to IP this until the next town meeting, which will then give the board another round of adequate time to come and present to us. And it's not a debate. I don't think we have to make it dramatic. We just simply establish guidelines of when we need to hear by. We ask for enough lead time for our sanity to have our discussion and publish it. And if that deadline isn't met from the board for whatever reason, we vote to IP, we state the reason why. And again, that's not a guarantee that anyone can stand up at town meeting. They can speak for it, they can speak against it. But as you were saying before, people typically go as advisory does. And if we say we haven't heard about it and we're requesting postponement of this to give adequate time for discussion and debate, in theory, or at least in practice, town meeting will go that way. I think we're making far too much about this. And again, this is not saying we shouldn't have liaisons and learn more and bring more knowledge, but I just think this problem we're trying to solve can be solved very simply here. Is just simply publishing schedule and guidelines of when we expect to hear from the boards, and here's the consequence or the outcome if we don't hear by that point.
Mm-hmm. I definitely don't want the impression to be that this would ever take place of showing up before the entire advisory board and being available for questions and answers. Again, it was more about managing conflicting agendas, giving us some feedback on what's coming down the pipeline. Again, this all may be a moot point because Blythe and I just discussed part of the new process is going to be that she's going to meet with me. And again, I can't guarantee what the next chair is going to do. I can guarantee I'm not doing this for the rest of my life. So you will have another chair eventually. And the next chair may say, I don't want to meet with Blythe. So this is a way to keep that process moving forward, no matter who the chair is. But I have no issue meeting with Blythe to sort of get an idea of what's coming. But I just strongly feel that the way it used to be run, where there was someone who could speak to something if no one was available to ask in the moment, they could say, oh, I have this email, or, oh, I heard this, it was more about rumblings. It will never take place of individual people who want an article or a board that wants an article on the warrant coming before us and presenting to us.
I think what I'm proposing solves that problem. Is I don't think we should spend our time discussing, debating, et cetera, as we did last week. We fell into the trap when they haven't come forward to present to us. I think we just, again, that's part of the guidelines, is come forward to present to the board. At that point in time, we're able to actually have a discussion. Until that point in time, we're moving on. Yeah, I think it's just going to be a lot more respectful of all of our time, right? It'll make clear guidelines. We'll set clear dates so people can arrange their meeting schedules as they need. And we don't have to have any of this drama, right? And again, I actually think that will reduce the reliance on this board from needing to participate in more meetings every week to be able to answer questions if that board hasn't taken the time to come present to us. I just think we avoid the trap from last week. If they haven't presented, we table it until the next meeting or the point in time they're ready to come present, and we just move on. And if we get to the point we hit our deadline before town meeting, we're going to make a recommendation to IP, right? Until, you know, I think we should just take control over the fire drill situation and just set out a cadence and a pace at which we operate and set out guidelines, and we'll discuss things at the point in time they're presented to us. And I think a lot of this drama will go away.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was speaking to earlier when I said that would be a natural consequence of any board that wasn't prepared. So I think that, you know, Blythe is going to hopefully convey the importance of a timeline and having it mesh with advisory's need for recommendations and need for question and answer sessions. And if they aren't able to, for whatever reason, then the natural consequences will be what they are, which is what Jonathan was saying, which is what I was saying earlier, whether that be IP it or no recommendation whatsoever, or a vote for no because we didn't have all the information, whatever it may be, we make that decision in the moment, and they have to deal with the fallout. Hopefully, I'd like to not have that be the case. I would like to not have contentious relationships with any boards. And there are boards that, you know, based on their own timelines would tend to fall into this category. And then we might end up having a contentious relationship because they keep missing our deadlines. I don't want that. That's not how I want advisory to be presented. But I also don't want anyone taking advantage of our time and not respecting that our vote and our recommendation is important. So I'd like to, like I said, continue for Blythe to relay this to all of the boards for moving forward in the spring. And she and I will work on the wording of it and the language of it over the winter. It's not something that needs to be done today. It can, you know, it can wait, and we're already past whatever could be done at this point. So we're only referring to what can be done moving forward for the spring. So Blythe and I can work on the language of that, but I think a lot of what you just said, Jonathan, will be said as well as implied in that language. And hopefully we won't have to do that, because hopefully everyone will respect the process that we have asked for moving forward. And again, like I said, as far as being a liaison, it's really just as little as you want to put into it, as much as you want to put into it. But it's just knowing that we have someone on advisory who can be in contact with those individual boards or is privy to their agenda and their email, because one person, say the chair, cannot subscribe to all of the board's agendas and keep that information straight as a volunteer. So it needs to be split up. But yes, I want to make sure that advisory is taken seriously, and that people's goal is to get in front of advisory in time for their recommendation for whichever meeting is coming up, fall or spring. So I will work on the language of that with Blythe over the winter. I will get back to you guys before it is sent out so that we can all weigh in on it. So we will probably have one meeting in December or January that will go over the language that we are going to convey to the boards, as well as what's coming down the pipeline in case anyone has any questions ahead of time. And then we will start meeting again in late February, early March with setting the agenda for the spring. All right. So I think that's it for this. Does anyone have anything else to say? Weigh in, questions for Blythe? Oh, Blythe, I'm sorry. I apologize. We started this because I was trying to get to it before Kristen had to leave. But you had a last minute unpaid bill, correct? I keep
Yeah,
saying-
so I sent it yesterday. As you know, we all have a service sharing arrangement with Millis, town of Millis, for a part-time IT person. Millis they admit dropped the ball on sending us the fourth quarter FY21 invoice. We just got it on October 6th. It's for $1,361 and some change. I can send you the email I got from the town administrator this tonight, apologizing, but it does need to be paid for the services we bought, if you will, in May, June. And we can afford to pay for it out of the current year's budget. It's just we needed, now that we've closed the books, we have a 9/10 vote of town meeting, is the only way that we can do that. So it's unfortunate, but it's a fact of life. So that's why we leave that article on. We hope we never use it, but this time, unfortunately, we find ourselves in that situation.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Go ahead, Brian.
I have one question on the invoice that came in. There was the 1,000 and change, but there was also the other piece. Was that for Q3 or is that for Q1?
That's for Q1 of this year.
Okay.
It's for $9,700 and some odd cents. Yeah, it's working out really well. Like the guy we hired, we're both thrilled with, and finding great employees these days is a bit of a challenge. So, but my apologies. I'm embarrassed by it, and we'll both tighten up our procedures to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And I sent a bunch of things today, maybe more than all your inboxes wanted, but
Yeah, Erica
I'd
sent
err on the side of caution.
Erica sent them all out. For the people who had questions on the wastewater and stormwater and the solar stuff, were all of your questions answered? Because we have no experts next week. We're just simply discussing amongst ourselves and voting and then assigning recommendations. So if you have any questions, now's the time, and Blythe can either answer them or get the information to us. Does everyone feel comfortable? I'm not asking how you're voting, but does everyone feel comfortable voting on those, even though we didn't get all of the answers last week that we wanted? Or do we not feel comfortable voting on them? Anyone have any?
The one question I would
mute.
pose regarding the solar charging stations is the question was posed back of, is there any kind of cost analysis or what's expected from a revenue recoup from fees? And I think that was an open question. So at this point, I don't think we know whether this would be, we know what the expense for the town, what's being asked for to install the charging stations, but we don't know what the total operating cost and kind of whether it's going to be break even, revenue generating, or there will be additional expense just from an operational perspective. If that could be provided, even at a high level, would be beneficial for voting.
So actually, if you look at the latest list of capital items, we've taken the charging stations off the list for this fall. I think the questions that everybody had were very good and deserve more work on it. So I just think we need to do that work and bring it back in the spring. Never want to lose opportunity for a good grant program to pay for something, but we're not ready to, if we couldn't answer your questions, we're not ready for town meeting. And so we've reduced the amount of capital by that.
Okay, sorry if I missed that. Thank you.
No, it's no reason, no worries.
I didn't have a chance to look in any detail at the two bylaws that we got, stormwater and the other one. So I may have questions, but I did, while we were sitting here, email Blair about wanting to talk to him a little bit about that after I review them. And also I wanted to ask him about the Great Pond question that I brought up with the Mirror Lake thing. If I have issues with the discussion, I'll alert Blythe and you, Susan, to that. And maybe Blair could come to the meeting if it's not clear from the bylaws. I haven't looked at the changes.
Yeah,
The one question I asked Rich last week, and I'd like to hear if you followed up, was I was on the Conservation Commission the last time we updated the floodplain maps, and that was an issue that the Conservation Commission was involved in. I understand that the changes to the floodplain bylaw are part of the planning and zoning portion of the thing, but they impact the work that the Conservation Commission does, and vice versa. Rich said he was going to talk to him. I don't know if he's going to have time, blah, blah, blah.
That's where he was tonight.
Okay.
He's at their meeting.
Great.
Since I watched it last night, if anyone has time, I found the discussion that planning board had about the floodplain bylaw very helpful. And for me, I love to not talk about zoning. I understood it. So I'd say, watch just the beginning of their meeting, and that might answer some of your questions. As far as Blair, he leaves on vacation Friday morning for next week, so he's not available.
Better talk to him tomorrow then, huh?
Tell you what, email me your question and I will make sure I get that from him. I have a window to talk to him Friday morning before he gets on a plane, so I will work on that.
All right. Okay. Then I need to read the bylaws. So, and I don't know if you're going to get that email tonight. So we'll see.
So,
Yeah.
and with everything I sent tonight, I also included the overview by our consulting engineers on the stormwater changes. And because it makes clear why they need to do what they need to do, and that you might find that helpful as well.
Okay. And I actually have one small addendum to the conversation that we were having just prior to this, is that, Susan, you talked about needing to have liaisons to boards. We also used to have liaisons to some of the larger departments, i.e. DPW and the public safety entities, mostly, I think. I think we need to continue to after that, mostly because they tend to have all the capital stuff.
Mhm.
And getting early heads up on capital needs, like if they're talking to us in the spring about what they're going to be asking for in the fall, is always helpful. So
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. Like, for example, if you're being the CPC and the library person would be easy, right? You know what I'm saying? But if you're zoning, maybe you're only zoning, right? That kind of thing. Or if you're planning, you're only planning. But I think that there's definitely a way to, maybe split, do fire and police, and then do, DPW and something else, and then maybe do library and board of health or whatever. I mean, the big ones can be alone, and then the smaller ones can be kind of lumped together.
One that I would point out to you is Fire Station Building Committee. That's where I was before I zoomed up here tonight. Our tentative plan is to finish the feasibility study by the end of the calendar year and possibly be ready to come back to the fall town meeting next year with bids in hand to go to construction on that project, which would require a town meeting vote and probably a debt exclusion. So that's a project that's going to move we hope very quickly, and that might be a good liaison opportunity.
Yeah, why, just out of curiosity, when that was designed, why wasn't there, like, I know that for like B1, they had liaisons from different boards that would be affected. Like they had a select board liaison, they had an advisory board liaison. Why did the fire committee not do that?
So the select board took a slightly different track with this committee after the police station and decided to seat a 7-member committee that was more based with subject matter experts, if you will. There's an architect, an engineer, a fire chief, and so on, so that a sustainability person, so that the people who understand what goes into some of these buildings can be the ones recommending what happens. They still have to but they have to check in regularly with the select board. Like if the select board don't agree with a recommendation of the feasibility study, we're not going into schematic design. We're not going to go down that road. And so I think there's more opportunity to make sure we stay on the right track. But we would like to move very quickly, and the architects think it's possible to be ready, a year from now, to be heading for a vote to be going to build it and starting in 23.
Okay. So one of the other things that Blythe and I will do, and David, if you'd like to be part of that, if anyone would like to be part of it, is we'll meet over the winter after town meeting. We'll come up with a list of who we really think needs a liaison, because there might be some boards out there that don't actually need one. And we'll get that list together and then we'll discuss after that. But well in advance of when you would need to do it for spring meetings. So probably by December or January, both the language of the message that we want to send out, as well as assigning or volunteering for specific liaison groups. And they might not, like Blythe was saying and David was saying, it might not be a board, it might be a department. So we won't assign those next week. We will just be voting on the warrant and assigning recommendations, and then Blythe and I will discuss the language and get a list together, and then I will call for a meeting. I would say December, but in all honesty, everyone is crazy busy in December with Christmas and holidays and different things. So it'll probably end up being January, but it'll be early enough in January that there's plenty of time to feel like you're not under the gun. I don't want anybody to feel like they're rushed to get into contact with anyone or handle anything. So, okay. Sorry for the long-winded meeting. I just felt like some of these things really needed to be addressed. I know I, for one, was very frustrated last week. I would not ever want to speak for anyone else, so I don't know if anyone else was. So I felt like it needed to be addressed. So, and again, sorry for my conversation with Rich that was not fully explained, because I need to be reminded sometimes that there are people out there who actually go and watch our YouTube meetings, and I forget that they do that. So I need to do a much better job of explaining everything instead of speaking in shorthand. So, if there's nothing else, I'll take a motion to adjourn, and I will see you all next week for the vote.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. See you guys next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye.